All right, we are at the top of the hour. It is noon Eastern Standard Time, so we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We'll start off with a few admin items. We have disabled video because we have quite a few people on the line today, and we want to reduce any potential strain on WebEx. We have also muted everyone on entry to help prevent background noise. If you have any questions during the session, please post your question in the chat and we'll be happy to answer your questions on the spot or at the end during the question and answer section. In the past, we've had a few questions regarding charging for the sessions like these. So I want to let you know that as the session is considered voluntary, there is no charge code from us. However, as always, talk with your TOL supervisor if you have any questions. Earlier today, we emailed out a PDF with the slide deck that will be referenced during the session today. If you did not receive the PDF via email, we'll post a link in the chat window where you can access and download it now. We are recording today's session and we'll post the recording on our degree page as soon as possible. If you need the link for our degree page, please let us know in the chat. As a quick reminder, if you have trouble with audio or video, we recommend disconnecting from the Cisco AnyConnect VPN. And if we move to the next slide, for our agenda today, we will start with some quick introductions, then go right into the main part of our presentation, which is Red Hat and Ansible 101. We'll follow that up with some training opportunities and finish with some Q&A. Again, thank you all for joining us. My name is Zulika Lim, and I am one of the learning specialists in learning and development. I'm based in Washington, D.C., and I've been with the firm for about 2 years. With me today is my colleague, Scott Cormack, and I will turn it over to him to introduce himself. Scott?
Good afternoon, morning, evening, wherever you are in the world. My name's Scott. I've been with Booz Allen for about 2.5 years now, and with learning and development for about 6 months. I am part of the digital solutions programs from learning and development, and I would like to extend an offer if anybody needs any more sort of information regarding Red Hat or anything else learning and development. I will be posting my email in the chat throughout the presentation. Feel free to send me an email, Teams messages, smoke signals, whatever sort of mode of communication is your preferred. And I will do what I can to help you. If I can't help you, I will find somebody who can. With that, I will hand you guys over to Geraldine, our first representative from Red Hat.
Thanks, Scott. Hi, everyone. My name is Geraldine Llames. I'm the Federal Training Manager over at Red Hat and supporting Booz Allen Hamilton's training. I'm based out of Northern Virginia, and I've been with Red Hat since last December. So whenever you send those smoke signals to Scott, he'll probably pass you over to me. So I'm excited to talk about training a little bit after my colleague John tells us about Ansible. So John, kicking it over.
Awesome. Thanks, Geraldine. Hey, everybody. My name is John Walter. I'm a solutions architect here at Red Hat, primarily focusing on our training and certification offerings. I've been at Red Hat for just about 5 years now, and I am based out of Raleigh, North Carolina, where Red Hat is headquartered. We'll go ahead and jump into the content. So obviously today we're going to be really talking about Ansible at a high level, essentially an introduction to how you automate everything and how Red Hat training can help with that. Quick agenda of what we're going to cover. First and foremost, why do we need automation? What is Ansible? And we'll talk about a couple of different products that Ansible comprises of. Then I'll give a few examples of some automation tasks across a few different devices, whether it be Linux, networking devices, or Windows OS. Finally, Geraldine will walk us through some of the Red Hat training offerings that we have, and specifically, we'll dive a little bit into our Ansible curriculum, and then we'll definitely have time for Q&A at the end, so please make sure you're putting your questions in the chat. Let's jump right into it. So obviously, we face a lot of challenges within IT, regardless of your role or responsibility. Effort takes time, time is money, all these old adages, and But effort really has a human toll, right? And in the end, we are people. We're trying to work with other people. We're trying to force machines to do as much of the work that the machine can do on its own. And so why we automate, it's pretty straightforward, right? We're tired of doing the same task over and over again, and automation is supposed to make our jobs and our lives a lot easier. And so it also presents the opportunity to really innovate, right? If you're not having to spend time manually creating users every time you onboard somebody, you can spend that time working on projects that you are actually passionate about. And we know that automation is happening across organizations in silos. Taking a look at this chart, maybe your developers are already using Ansible, but maybe your security teams are doing kind of do-it-yourself scripting, right? Maybe your infrastructure teams are using bash scripts to try to do their automating. Networking teams are typically provided some kind of automation tool by the proprietary vendor that they're working with. Cisco offers one, Juniper, Arista. All of these vendors kind of have their own tools. But is organic automation enough, right? What we're talking about today is really an entire automation platform that should be able to serve as the building blocks for each of these teams, right? We know all these teams are already trying to automate their tasks, and some of them are already starting to use Ansible, but not all companies are automating in the same way or with as many teams. And so, we know that there's a value in a tool or a product or a platform, and that value is really dependent on what you can do with it and how quickly you can get your teams and your organizations to that kind of ideal state. And so, how do we accelerate our efforts so that we can really quickly respond to the demands from the key stakeholders, from the users, from our customers, from different communities? We need to make it easier for all of these teams to automate and communicate those automations with each other. And so automation typically starts with one team kind of organically, and then it grows out. And it's really key that all of these teams are able to automate in the same language, and that's really where Ansible comes in. And so, we've kind of boiled down Ansible to these three kind of key words. And, I'll be honest, when, I started working with Ansible and somebody kind of explained it to me this way, I thought it was really cheesy. It's simple, it's powerful, it's agentless, but, they really are three words that, best describe why people are choosing Ansible. So first and foremost, simple. Ansible is human readable. It's something that, all of the automation scripts are written in YAML. And if you're not familiar with YAML, it's a very, very simple markup language. So there's not really any kind of required coding skills, right? You don't have to be a developer to build out these scripts that do the automation for you. It's powerful because it's more than just a configuration management tool. Typically, Ansible is in conversations with things like Puppet and things like Chef, which are really, really good configuration management tools. In fact, Puppet for a long time was integrated into a lot of our products, including things like Red Hat Satellite for the configuration management piece of it. But when you look at just configuration management, you're really limiting yourselves to just specific teams that have a need for configuration management. What about your development teams that have a need to automate their application deployments? What about your networking teams that have a need to automate the deployment and ongoing management of all of these networking devices? And so when we say powerful, we're really talking about the different use cases that Ansible is capable of. And then agentless is also a really important piece. When you look at some of these other vendors that have different configuration management tools, typically you need to have an agent actually running on the endpoints that you're trying to manage. So for instance, if we're talking about Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and you want to manage, the 1,000 RHEL nodes that you have within your environment with Puppet, you need to have a Puppet agent actually existing on each of those endpoints before your central node will be able to actually manage those systems. And so it's one more kind of agent that you have to manage on these endpoints. It's one more thing that could potentially be exploited. Whereas with Ansible, Ansible uses the same kind of tools that you would use to connect to these endpoints anyway. So for a Linux or Unix-based system, Ansible is just able to connect via SSH, run these commands, and then disconnect. And you can run it as specific users. You can run it as a root user, or you can sudo, give privileges to, kind of an Ansible user as well. And then same thing on the Windows side, right? We're using WinRM to remotely connect to these devices and manage them. And so, you're able to really hit the ground running as soon as you have Ansible installed on a central node. you can start automating across all these other devices. So, that's why you would choose Ansible. What can you actually do with Ansible? I talked about this before. There's a lot of use cases outside of configuration management, and configuration management is a really important piece of this puzzle. But Ansible is capable of performing the provisioning, the auditing, compliance, application deployment, and a lot more. So you can see here, and I have another slide a little later on that really breaks it down based on all these different vendors that we work with as well. And so, outside of even just Linux from an infrastructure standpoint, Ansible is really capable of working on a variety of infrastructure, including Unix and Windows and different cloud providers, right? Storage and networking and firewalls and so much more. And so we're trying to enable the different roles within the organizations to really work together. We're trying to prevent teams or stop teams from automating within silos, right? We're all trying to move away from these waterfall development processes. From an application development standpoint, we need to do the same thing from an automation standpoint. And so, everyone can contribute their automation to a centralized place, which we'll talk about in a little bit, which is Ansible Tower, essentially a centralized way of managing and operationalizing your automation. And so, keep all of these roles in mind as we look going forward at some of the different use cases a little bit later on. But, ultimately what we want is to provide a platform, not just a specific tool, but a platform where enterprises can start automating across all of their different operations. And so we're going to talk about a couple different products today. Ansible is sort of an umbrella term that we talk about, but really within Ansible, there are a few different products. First and foremost, we're going to talk about Ansible Engine. Ansible Engine is really what runs these playbooks. The scripts are called playbooks. And so this is essentially an automation language. It's the framework that is meant to perfectly describe an IT application infrastructure. The second product we're going to talk about is Ansible Tower, and this is what really allows you to scale your IT automation. It allows you to manage really complex deployments and really is meant to kind of operationalize and speed up your productivity. And I mentioned this slide a couple slides ago, but these are the vendors that you are typically going to be working with, right? So, on the cloud side, every major vendor that is available out there, from AWS to Azure to Google Cloud to even OpenStack, our private cloud offering. Obviously, multiple operating systems, multiple virtualization and container suites, right? We work with VMware, who's largely one of our biggest partners, but also one of our biggest competitors in the space. You can see in the middle there, all the different Windows tasks that can be automated. Same thing on the networking side, and then obviously, security monitoring and DevOps. These are all different tools that can be integrated and automated by Ansible. And so, one example I give a lot is, we use ServiceNow internally for all of our ticket management, right? So if you're running into an issue with your RHEL Lenovo, you open up a ticket with ServiceNow, and we actually have this integrated into Tower. So when that ticket goes to help desk, what's actually happening is it goes into Tower. Tower, based on the ticket number that you've opened up, you have to choose different categories for the ticket that you're opening up. Tower then kicks off a couple tasks to see if it can resolve the issue automatically. And if it can't, that's when it actually sends it to the person working the help desk to manually intervene. And so from our standpoint, what we're using it for internally, and that's just one example, really cuts down our entire internal support process significantly. So let's jump into Ansible Engine first. And so, this is the piece we're talking about, the simple, powerful agentless, right? A few things here. So, obviously this is a cross-platform tool, works on Linux, Windows, Unix, networks, different cloud devices. The human readable piece we'll talk about in a little bit. Everything is meant to essentially be described. If you're familiar with the concept of infrastructure as code, essentially what you're doing within these playbooks is describing how you want the end state of a system to be. And then Ansible takes the steps to run the commands if necessary. We're going to talk a little bit about idempotency a little bit later on. And essentially what idempotency is only making changes when necessary. So for instance, if you're running a task that's going to create a user, assign them to a group, it's going to first check to make sure that that user isn't already created, because if it is already created, it's just going to skip that task. There's no reason for Ansible to intervene when the state is already at that ideal state. So let's jump into each of the kind of components of Ansible Engine. This is a diagram of what Ansible Engine looks like, all of its different components, and we're going to go through kind of what each of these components looks like and how they work together. So first and foremost, we have our playbooks. Ansible automation, this is like the requirement, right? It's playbooks. And so playbooks are a list of tasks. They're executed in order, and it tells we are essentially telling Ansible Engine to control the system what needs to be executed, and they're executed sequentially. We'll show an example of what an Ansible playbook looks like actually in this next slide, but essentially what we're looking at, we have a human readable, 16, 17 line playbook here. And what we're doing is a pretty simple task, right? We're installing a package on a Linux system. We're moving a file from our host to our endpoints, and then we're making sure that that service is started. In this case, it's an Apache web server. So I won't dive into too much of what these different things are. You can see that this is documented in a very specific way. The formatting in YAML is very particular, and so that's a lot of what at first kind of trips people up with writing playbooks. Is you have to be very particular about your formatting. But beyond that, you can see that there is a Yum package here. There's a template. Yum module here, a template module here, and a service module here. And then below that, there are specific criteria that we need to provide for it. And some of these are optional, some of them are required. In this case, the first task that we're doing is making sure that a package is present on the system. We want it to be the latest version of that package. And in this case, the package is HTTPD, which is our Apache package. So it's going to reach out to all of our hosts, in this case, our web hosts. And this is from an inventory file, which we'll talk about in just a second. And it's going to reach out to all of these hosts to make sure that this package is not only present on the system, but is at the latest version. So it will check first to see that the package is there. If it is, it will make sure that it's the latest available version based on whatever repositories you're configured. From there, it moves to the next task, which is actually copying an index file from my local system to all of these web hosts and putting it into a specific directory. From there, and I should say, it's even going to compare. So if I already have an index file in this destination directory and it doesn't match the index file that's on my host system, it will actually compare the contents of the two. And if they're different, it will actually copy over that file. So it's not just looking at, is the name of this file present? It's looking at the contents of the file as well to make sure that they match. And then below that, it's making sure that the service is actually started. So pretty straightforward. A couple of things I'll point out. We do have to specify an inventory here. What hosts do we want to actually target? We'll touch on inventories in a slide or two. We can, if needed, include variables, right? These can be as simple or as complex as you would like. So, we can do a lot of variables and we can build a lot of logic into this. We can even query the systems to get specific information, which we can then inject into these playbooks later on. So for instance, if I wanted to insert a task in between the downloading of the package and bringing the index file over where I got the host name of I could then, if I wanted to, update this index file so it actually had the host name in it, right? So maybe I go to that website just to test and it says hello from hostname. So, there's a lot that you can do as part of, building in variables. You're not required to run these as root users either, although some of these tasks may require you to be a root user, for instance, or at least have root privileges or sudo privileges. So, for instance, downloading and starting a service, both would require root access. So that's what this become yes means up here at the top. But we won't get too deep into that kind of stuff. So obviously we need playbooks. playbooks are using these modules, and we ship thousands of modules that align to different tasks across all kinds of different devices. So, even we'll talk about later on, a breakdown of what some of these modules look like. But for the most part, they're going to be written in either Python or PowerShell, and the modules themselves are what are actually executing the tasks. So, if you're a Linux administrator, as a very simple example, looking back on this, there's actually a module that I could put in place of this template module that would be a copy module. And the behavior of the copy module is exactly like if you were running the CP space, it's the copy command within the Linux command line. Beyond that are plugins, and plugins are essentially pieces of code that augment Ansible's functionality. Ansible uses plugin architecture. It enables really a rich, flexible feature set, and we ship with a whole bunch of plugins. You can also write your own really easily. And then we have filters as well, and they're kind of a good example of a plugin, right? So you can transform or format, whatever data is coming in and pipe that out to a filter, right? So maybe that's a regular expression, something like that. We have inventories, which I mentioned when looking at the playbook, and inventories are essentially a static file, or they can be a static file. That's what the example you're seeing here on the left is, where, I've got 2 servers that are my web servers. I have a database. I have a couple switches, a firewall, a load balancer. And so I can have one static file that has each of these host names kind of grouped, and then I can just target my web servers in my playbook, and it's going to know, oh, well, the web servers are or the web hosts are web server 1, web server 2. And you can also do a dynamic inventories, right? So you can have your systems integrated with your cloud provider, a satellite if you're using Red Hat Satellite. Some kind of system management tool can be integrated into Ansible as well to feed the inventories dynamically, especially when you're using, when you have a lot of workloads running on AWS. Maybe the IP addresses are changing constantly, but the host names are staying the same. And so you can have that information fed from AWS into Ansible to get that information as well, which I'm kind of cutting into my own slides here, because that's really what this cloud integration piece is talking about, right? Ansible can dynamically pull that inventory from your existing cloud infrastructure, or it can perform actions against those cloud APIs. So if you wanted to, delete an AWS, VPC or provision a VM on Azure, Ansible can do those things as well as get that information from those endpoints. And then you can use a CMDB for inventory or for variable storage. And the platform doesn't have to be your source of truth. You can rely on the existing mechanisms that you have already within your organization. And then finally, there is the infrastructure you're actually performing the actions on, right? We have hundreds of platforms that we support, whether it's Linux or VMware, Windows, networking devices, load balancers, IoT devices, you name it, you're able to automate with Ansible. And I'll hold this slide up for a second. I know that we sent the slides out earlier on, but if you're just interested in seeing a bunch of different playbook examples, I highly encourage you to especially take a look at the top link there. This is the official Ansible projects GitHub page. It has a lot of different examples of different playbooks, and no one expects that when you're starting to automate things that you necessarily need to start from scratch. Obviously, we are from the training organization and we can help you to get started. But, once you are required to do this within a customer's environment, you have a lot that you can leverage from, our official GitHub space as well. So we're going to pivot a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit now about Ansible Towers. And, Ansible engine, this is writing the playbooks. Think of this, as the end user, building out some kind of automation. Tower is really where we operationalize this. This is where we're scaling. This is where, control and delegation comes in. Role-based access control is going to be a major part of this. So, that's, push button deployment, the delegation piece. Centralized logging, how do we audit and how do we manage compliance with this automation? And then Tower also provides a RESTful API. So, you can have a centralized place where you can control your infrastructure. It's a visual dashboard. This is where you can have operations teams come in and put in role-based access controls, job scheduling, notifications, and you have kind of a graphical way of managing your inventories. So, what is Ansible Tower, right? You can see an idea, a glimpse of it there on the right. This is the dashboard, and a couple things I'll point out. Having all of the hosts that are being targeted, essentially all of your inventories are made up of hosts, and I can see, I have 3 different inventories that are comprised of 3,691 hosts. There are 83 failed hosts, so these are 83 hosts that I can't actually get in contact with right now. But ultimately, the idea here is that operations teams, sometimes your non-technical folks, are typically going to be responsible for delegating, for making sure that specific teams have access to specific systems, and as importantly, that specific teams do not have access to specific systems. It also allows you to create very intricate workflows. So I go back to the example of what we do internally with our ServiceNow deployment, where teams are able to essentially, based on input, kick off these intricate workflows. And maybe that's one playbook that checks to make sure that the user is actually created, and if it is created, it moves on to a second playbook. But if it's not created, it moves on to a different playbook, right? So workflows really chain any number of plays or playbooks together, regardless of whether they use different inventories, or if they run as different users, or you can have them just run once and utilize different credentials. So I talked a little bit about this piece, having the ability to, once these playbooks are created, execute them from this centralized, push button deployment from the tower, having an API that will allow you to, integrate with other tools like ServiceNow or Infoblox, having teams that can, manage the roles and who has access to what, and then being able to integrate with a lot of the different authentication tools that you're using, a lot of the notification tools that you're using, or even the logging tools that you're using. So Tower has centralized logging for all the workflows that you would be implementing, but you can also, if you're using like Log4j or an Elk Stack or something like that, those things can be integrated and exported in from the Tower's API as well. A couple other features, right? So job templates. Essentially, job templates are a way of soliciting input from within the playbook, right? So if your playbook has, let's say, specific variables that can't be queried from these endpoints, maybe they're, if I go back to my ServiceNow example, maybe it's, does this user exist? Things like that. So you create a job template that is really just creating users and adding them to specific groups. Maybe they're adding the user after it's created locally to an Active Directory or something like that. So you can create these templates where you are soliciting input from the user. So when this job template gets kicked off, all you really have to do is provide, the inventory. So what systems am I running this job on? I need to provide credentials. How do I access this device that I need to run it on? And then a project, and the project is just the playbooks. And then you can add, surveys, so that you say, all right, well, based on, this playbook where you're going to be creating users, you're going to need to input a password as well. I can create essentially surveys so that these things are being input by the end user. And so the end user then can go and, essentially check out this template, run this job, and then their user creation is all done on the back end for them. We talked a little bit about inventory management as well, and really, the idea here is, this is a collection of hosts, and against which we'll be running these jobs, and it's the same as just an inventory file. So you can have this kind of centralized, inventories here. It's a nice, graphical way of managing it. The behavior is identical to if you were to manage this from the command line, but we do a lot of building inventories from the command line from essentially an admin's point of view, and then the operations teams kind of come through, and maybe they're adding specific permissions or making sure that they're adding hosts as they're bringing those hosts online, making sure they're getting added to the specific inventories as well. From a credential standpoint, it can be as simple as a plain text password. It can be an SSH key. It can be a token or whatever automated endpoint is needed for that authentication. And so Tower's capable of including these different integrations with any kind of existing credential management tool you might have. So if you're using like HashiCorp or CyberArk or even just a simple LDAP or IPA server, those things can be integrated into Tower as well. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel on the credential side. You can use whatever the customer's existing credentials are. From a project standpoint, projects, they're just collections of playbooks, right? And so you can have these kind of intricate projects that are meant to essentially be a workflow, right? And so the projects can also be managed from a role standpoint. So you can make sure that only specific users or specific teams that have specific roles associated with them are only able to access the project. And maybe some of them are only able to read them. Some of them are only able to execute, etc. I think that this slide is out of order, my fault. I did mention that there is a RESTful API that can be queried as well. This is the way that we can integrate both querying Tower from our playbooks and by integrating a lot of the different tools. So for instance, going once again back to this ServiceNow example from what we're doing internally, what happens when Tower is not able to automatically fix something is that the way that it notifies the IT person that needs to actually go through and take a look at this ticket is it uses Slack. So what Tower does once I submit a ticket that my user isn't able to log in or whatever it is, I have to provide what my username is. Tower kicks off a couple jobs to verify that the user exists, to verify that it's able to log in based on whatever credentials are on my end. And if all of those checks fail, it then is going to send a Slack message to one of these IT professionals to actually go in and manually intervene. So you'll be able to integrate a lot of the tooling that your teams are probably already using is really, really key. I mentioned role-based access control, be able to create teams essentially that have specific responsibilities, or keep it as granular as you want and do it from a user standpoint. And I also mentioned logging, centralized logging. Obviously, logging provides the capability to send really detailed logs to all kinds of different third-party external log aggregation services. So these services are connected to this data feed essentially, and then you can aggregate them with Logstash or Splunk or Loggly, Sumo Logic, all these other vendors. And the types of data that are really most useful are these job fact data or job events, the job runs. Was this successful? Did this job fail, etc. And then Tower is capable of just discarding any uncaptured data if the logging aggregator is down too. And then this is an example of what I was talking about earlier with these workflows. They really allow you to kind of configure a sequence of these job templates. And so you have these job templates, they're linked together using this kind of graphical node-like structure. And these nodes can be jobs, they can be project syncs, they can be inventory syncs. And the template can be a part of different workflows or used multiple times, even in the same workflow. But ultimately, the idea here is scaling. And so, your Tower can be clustered in the same way that your system would be. And so, the cluster adds in the same way that, clustering your Linux servers, it adds redundancy, it adds capacity, and it allows teams to really scale their Ansible automation across their entire enterprise. And so, currently, Ansible automation architecture, I think, can scale to something like 200,000 nodes with 20 cluster nodes. So, a lot of different tasks. So we're going to jump now into just some example use cases. A couple of these are going to be pretty simple. A couple will be a little more complex. But on the Linux side, right? Why are people automating Linux? Obviously, especially Red Hat Enterprise Linux is very prevalent within the enterprise. And so we have several Linux modules that can be used to manage different Linux devices, 60 plus on the system module side, a bunch on the packaging side, some file system management modules. command modules, clustering modules, being able to automate essentially every task that a Linux administrator would need to do and process on Linux. So a couple examples. This is a very simple example of just how somebody would go through and update all of the packages, all of the services that are on a specific system. So very simple, we're naming this playbook at the top, upgrade the rel packages. We're targeting all of our rel hosts. This could be as many as 20,000, as few as just one. The nice thing here is if this inventory, based on this inventory rel, is fed dynamically, maybe by something like AWS or by Red Hat Satellite, then I never really have to worry about this. I can run this playbook, on a weekly basis, and all of my new hosts that have been added within that last week are going to be targeted in this. And then any of my hosts that have been around forever and there's no new updates, then this task will not execute. This task will only execute on systems where there are packages to upgrade. So pretty straightforward. This is a little less complex than that earlier example I gave. I now want to dive in a little bit into the network automation side. So, network automation is becoming a huge need, especially for organizations where they are, not tied just to one vendor, right? Cisco has been kind of the king on the networking side for a very long time, but now we have, Arista and Juniper and, Vios and, all of these other networking vendors that are really emerging, especially on, you have F5 on the load balancer side. And so, we've worked with these vendors to develop these different modules, and we have over 1,000. And I'll be honest with you, I think this slide is actually out to date because I think we're closer to 1,500 now, but across 65 or over 65 different network platforms as well. Why automate your network? Well, it seems pretty straightforward, right? A lot of what's happening is that organizations are manually deploying all of these different devices, and then they're using automation really just to check for like configuration drift and things like that throughout the remainder of the life cycle. We want to make sure that you're able to automate across all of these devices all at the same time when you're deploying, when you're managing, when you're developing on them as well. So, a few of the vendors that we worked with, here's an example with Cisco. This is something that when I work with network engineers, they're doing constantly. They're just running show commands against different devices and looking for different kinds of errors. And example where the actual output is very benign, right? What we're doing right here, we're not changing anything. This is really just pinging these endpoints and making sure that they're actually up. And so the results of what we would see here are then pushed to the terminal window. And you can see here that I see these tasks as they're executed in order. So the first task is running the show command, and the second task is taking that output and actually displaying it here. So there's two tasks, they ran successfully, no changes are being made, but I can see that these devices are up, that they're running, and I can even get, what are the IP addresses of these different endpoints. And we have the same thing for, the exact same module for every other vendor that's out there. So, in this example, this is just for our Cisco devices running a specific command that would only work on the Cisco side. But we could do the exact same thing for, a Juniper device or an Arista device as well. And then on the Windows automation side, think of with Windows automation, if you're familiar with DSC. Think of these DSC resources, they're PowerShell resources. They're essentially like extended modules. And so we have a lot of modules for Windows, but then we are also able to leverage PowerShell, which is how a lot of people are already automating with Windows anyway. And we're able to leverage those PowerShell modules to really extend our footprint on the Windows automation side. And so essentially we're running all this on Windows hosts. Obviously we are the Linux company, but we know that Windows obviously exists, and a lot of our customers are not just Linux shops, and so they want to be able to automate their Windows footprint the exact same way that they're automating on the Linux side. And so when we say Windows automation, what do we really mean? Here's a few kind of specific example use cases. These are all currently available to execute via the modules and roles that we have in Ansible today. If you go back to that GitHub page, there will be a lot of different examples that you can use playbook examples that you can pull from. But some of the modules are essentially Windows modules that are Windows versions of the classic modules, right? So we have a copy and a service and a reboot and a ping module, but these are Windows versions of those classic modules. And so, the majority of Windows modules are going to be specific to the Windows platform. They're going to allow Ansible to interact with the classic Windows functionality, like the registry, with Windows domains, with those PowerShell, the DSC, the desired state configuration resources. And here's just an example of a playbook written for Windows. They're just as simple and easy to read as the playbooks written for any other platform. We're targeting specific hosts. And in this case, all that we're doing is ensuring that a local account has been created. And it needs to have a specific password, and that account has been added to a specific group. So this is an example I've been kind of mentioning throughout. And maybe, local users are important within some organizations, but typically they need to be added to an Active Directory like everybody else is. So this is adding that user at a local level. This next playbook is adding that user, now that it's been created, to the Active Directory. And so this is creating a new user. It's then adding it to one or more groups. It's then verifying that each group exists if the group itself hasn't been created. And then it also emails the manager with the new account information. So there's a lot of information going on. We're only using one module here. And from this module, we have a lot of different kind of flags or options that we can add to this. And some of these are required. Most of them are probably not, but based on your need, you have a lot of these different options within the module to specify. And so this is a really common use case. If you had like an HR rep, and they might kick off this playbook every time they onboard somebody. And that way they don't have to open up a ticket with IT. Maybe IT is slammed and they don't get to it for a few days. And so now this new hire, can't be productive. They can't log into the system. So this is something that could be automated just from the click of a button from the Ansible tower. And the second half of the playbook, totally optional, right? Notifying the manager user that the user has been created, so this could essentially just be like less than 5 lines, really. So, with that, we want to talk a little bit about some of the training that we offer within Red Hat. I'm going to kick it over to Geraldine really quickly, who will be able to walk through some of the different offerings that we have, and I'll kick back into the curriculum piece.
Awesome. Thanks, John. Hi again, everyone. So John talked a lot about Ansible, and if you're interested in getting more in depth, I'm going to quickly go over some training options we have for you. So we understand that people learn in a number of different ways, and we have a handful of options for everyone. I want to note that Red Hat training is identical in content, regardless of modality. So the difference in options is really based on how the content is delivered. That being said, I'm going to talk through the different ways to train. So classroom training will be a class that's open to the public. It's certified instructor-led and takes place in a classroom environment, often in training centers. And if you have 6 or more students looking to take the same class, we offer private on-site training that's instructor-led and delivered at your office or selected venue. And the benefit with private training is that discussions, examples, and questions are relevant to your specific organization and group. As you can imagine, as a result of the pandemic, for both private on-sites and public classroom training, we've seen a shift to a lot of virtual training. So we do live instructor-led classes that are held online in an interactive virtual environment with the same labs that we would use in an in-person class. So for our online learning, this features the exact same course content in our live classes. And so with the purchase of one-off classes, you'll get 90 days of unlimited access to self-paced course content, 80 hours of labs and webinars just like this. And also part of our online portfolio is the Red Hat Learning subscription. And that provides 1-year access to unlimited self-paced Red Hat training.
Sorry, Geraldine. I knew we had a slide. It was just out of order.
Found it. There was a mix-up with the slide, so we're jumping back. So I wanted to highlight the Red Hat Learning subscription because with our partner Fierce Software, I'm excited to share that we're offering the standard learning subscription exclusively to Booz Allen Hamilton employees at a significant discount. So the list price is $7K, and you'll be able to purchase it for only $2,500 using your Booz Allen Hamilton email in Fierce's portal. And so this will provide 1 year of 24/7 self-paced access to all 50 plus Red Hat training courses. And you'll get 400 hours of hands-on practice labs, 10 course ebook downloads, early access to classes, and then you can reach out to our experts via the expert chat and things like that. And so if you jump back to
Sorry, I don't want to give everyone a. There we go.
So I'm super pumped for this slide because we didn't offer them before, but last month we rolled out remote certification exams. And so you can now officially get Red Hat certified from the comfort of your own home and basketball shorts. So, you know, much like our classes, we offer classroom and on-site exams with in-person proctors, but you can also take individual exams either at an authorized testing center or now remotely in your home, your office, or wherever. And these are observed by a remote proctor as well. I want to also note that the standard learning subscription comes with 5 unique exam vouchers and 2 unique retakes, which you can definitely use for the remote exams. And then to help set you up for success, on the next page, we have learning paths for our different products and certifications. And since this is an Ansible webinar, I wanted to highlight this particular learning path and let John speak to it. But any questions about Red Hat training, you can reach out to Scott and he can send them my way. And John, if you want to talk to the Ansible curriculum.
Yeah, definitely. So, you know, one thing that we want to point out, and you know, this is something that will be a little more technical, a little more of a deep dive than what we covered today. We do have this Ansible Essentials technical overview. This is something delivered by one of our instructors. It's essentially about an hour and a half, 2 hour kind of overview of what we would cover in one of these courses. Now, this Ansible Essentials is geared towards Linux administrators, but is a really good kind of way of dipping your toe, you know, understanding some of the terms. There'll be much more kind of a demonstration, you know, aspect of it. But really, the second line is where we get started with actually training on Ansible. And so we've designed 3 courses that are essentially the same, just for different use cases. And so right there in the middle, we have our Red Hat System Administration 3 course. This is our RHCE, our Red Hat Certified Engineer course. But it's completely designed around Linux automation. It's essentially a Red Hat Linux automation with Ansible course. And so this teaches you, you know, everything from installing Ansible on, you know, specific control nodes, creating inventories, so managing the different systems you'll actually be automating, and then walks you through, you know, this is how you write playbooks, starting very, very basic, and then getting to some really, you know, advanced administration tasks that you would be executing on Red Hat Enterprise Linux systems. For Windows administrators or for network administrators, we have essentially the same class, just instead of diving into Linux tasks, we're talking about networking tasks. We're talking about Windows automation tasks. And within each of these courses, as Geraldine mentioned, we have, you know, really robust lab environments. And about half the time that you're in one of these courses, you're going to be actually going through hands-on demonstrations and lab exercises, working within the environments that you would ultimately you know, would mimic what you'd be doing in reality. And so, you know, if you're primarily going to be responsible on the Windows side, you know, our Windows administrator focused Ansible course would be where you would start. Same thing for the Linux people and for the networking folks. And then that all kind of funnels into our advanced automation course, which is really about, you know, how do I scale? How do I leverage Ansible Tower? So we spent some time talking about Tower, but it's really for those who are experienced with Ansible that want to take their, you know, foundational skills to the next level. A lot of it is kind of focused around scalable design. You know, how do I operationalize, I should say, our automation deployment, and how do I leverage Ansible Tower to really centrally coordinate my use of Ansible and kind of control access to all of these different hosts and systems. So, you know, really, my suggestion, my recommendation is, you know, choosing one of these 3 starting points And then from there, moving into the advanced automation course, which will really hone in on recommended practices for really efficient automation, using some of the advanced features of Ansible to work with controlling and managing data. And then obviously, how do I implement and use all of the different capabilities of the Ansible Tower? So with that, I'm going to kick it back over. I think that there's a couple house cleaning items as well.
Yeah, thanks, John. So we have a couple of free self-paced and FlexEd eligible virtual learning plans and opportunities we'd like to share with you today. First up, as you can see on the slide, if you click on the Red Hat tile, it will take you to our Red Hat degree page where you will find training for several Red Hat systems. The next tile over will take you to our Red Hat Ansible automation degree page where you'll find training specific to Ansible. And finally, our last tile will take you to our partner page with Red Hat where you can take advantage of a deeply discounted learning subscription for all of things Red Hat related. On the next slide, with all that being said, some of you may be unsure of where to get started on your Red Hat journey, and you can click on the link here and assess your skills on a variety of different subjects for free. And lastly, if we go to our next slide, I would like to ask for all of you to complete a short survey to let us know how we're doing and what future topics you would like to learn about. Would you like to repeat of this webinar? Would you like a webinar on Red Hat OpenStack? Let us know and we'll be happy to schedule one in the future. And with that, I'd like to ask if anyone has any questions. I know a few came in during our session, but if you have any questions, do feel free to post them into our chat window or feel free to come off mute and ask us verbally. I will pass it over to John so he can answer some questions.
Thanks, Alika. The first question we have is, the Windows Active Directory example I gave. Our infrastructure teams always slam. Sometimes developers just need them to bounce a service or a VM, but they can't get to it for a long time. Worst case these days, this is giving me flashbacks to my previous role. Are there modules that would allow developers to execute a basic task like restarting a service or a VM? So definitely, 100%. And that's a lot of what the use cases for developers is how do I, for lack of a better term, circumvent the infrastructure teams who are always going to be slammed. In my experience, even within Red Hat, that's typically the case. And so, yeah, there are definitely modules that can restart specific services, even non-standard services. So there is a service module, and essentially you just name the service that you want to restart, and you put the state as restarted. You can do the same thing with virtual machines. You can just do a classic reboot, a graceful shutdown or whatever on those endpoints. But if you're even talking about like your own application and restarting that, as long as it has a service file associated with it, and that all depends on if it's running on Windows, if it's running on Linux, or if it's just running on whatever, Unix, or you name it. You just have to make sure that there is some kind of service module that can manage it. But to answer your question simply, yes, 100%. And that's a lot of where Tower can come into play, because at least in my experience, I know that infrastructure people can typically be very, very protective of their environments, I guess is maybe the most politically correct way to put it. And so that's really where, the role-based access control piece of Tower can come into play, making sure that, development teams are only able to run specific modules or specific playbooks against specific endpoints. And I assume that this is probably maybe a dev environment, maybe it's production as well, but there are a lot of different considerations. The very simple answer is 100% yes, but you probably will want to implement some kind of RBAC to make sure that developers aren't able to do everything on those endpoints as well. Are there any other questions? I'm going to pull up the Q&A chat. I believe there is a question in there, but maybe Zalika or Scott can answer on the FlexEd piece.
Let's see. Yeah, how do we clear our FlexEd Advanced if we want to use discounted one-year access? Do we need to complete? go ahead and send me an email, Merrill, on that one. I'm going to need to get some more information. I don't want to drag everybody down with the back and forth.
And then were there any other questions? Happy to answer around anything we covered today, or obviously, like Zalika said, would love to hear from you. Feedback. Was this session up to your liking? Is there anything that we could get a little deeper in? Let us know if there are any topics you would like us to cover in the future. Anything, whether it be a different product or just getting a little more advanced on some of the previous sessions that we've done, whether it be Kubernetes or on the Ansible side as well. All right. Well, with that, I will kick it back over to Zalika and Scott to wrap up. I want to thank everybody for your time on behalf of Geraldine and myself. We'd love to continue doing these with you all, and please let us know what you would like us to cover in the future.
Great, thanks, John. So again, we do have a few more minutes, so if anyone does have any questions, do feel free to either come off mute or put them in the chat. We'll stick around for a little bit longer, so if you do have any questions, feel free to ask them. But if not, that was our session for today, so thank you all for joining us, and you are definitely free to go.